Okay, we're out in the shop today, and another project that we need to get done out in the mountain is our solar power. So we're going to go into that today and talk a little about what we're going to use for our mini yurt power system. Okay, we got a lot of components here. We have our pure sine wave inverter. We've already used that out on the mountain. I have two AGM batteries that were from a boat, and we're using those for power. And we can, do things like charging small batteries in our phones, computers, run lights, things like that, run a little refrigerator. So there's things that you can run off of this system, but it's not a lot. We have a solar charger here. We have a couple of solar panels that we purchased that were used. They're 265 watt panels. They're already out at the mountain, and we'll be utilizing those to build our solar charging system. Got pigtails that hook into the that'll go into the charge controller, and those will be attaching to our solar cables here. And these cables, I had no idea how long we're going to go, so we got some nice long cables that we'll be able to reach out and put the panels wherever we want for now. Lots of other components. We got a fuse block if we want to use the battery power to either go with 12 volt or 24 volt. We got circuit breakers. We have got some terminals so that we can hook the batteries into the system, and lots of different sized wires to attach various components. And there's a number of different gauges here. Something I highly recommend for anybody that's going to be attaching cables is one of these kits that has just all the different plugs that you might need for attaching cables. They're different hole diameters, different gauge sizes, and they include the shrink wrap sleeves of different sizes. And these sleeves have what's similar to a hot melt glue inside of them, so when they shrink down, that glue seals up the wires and makes for a waterproof connection. Maybe overkill for what we're doing, but it does make for a nice hookup. What I like about the Victron equipment is it's pretty robust equipment. It's heavy, it appears to be well made, and it does have Bluetooth capability, so you don't have to have separate monitoring equipment to see what's going on in your charging system or what you have left in your batteries and such. And there are different items that you can get that allow you to connect your equipment remotely to other pieces of equipment. Because it has Bluetooth in it, you can use other things like a computer or a tablet. You don't have to have wires, so it reduces the complication of things. This is not a very big inverter. It's rated for somewhere under 500 watts, but we don't use a lot of power. Obviously when you're selecting an inverter, you need to figure out what electrical requirements that you have. Ours is pretty low, so we don't need a real lot out there right now. But just for an initial system, this will give us a way to charge this 200 amp hour batteries up, and we'll be able to power things from that. Okay, this is the Victron solar controller that I chose. This matches up with our panels that we're going to be using. I'm not going to go into the electrical parts of all this. There's lots of other videos that describe how you figure out what your needs are going to be and what size components you should have. You're going to want to have at least some kind of an understanding about the concepts of amperage and voltage, so that you can calculate watts that you're going to need, so that you can understand what size batteries you need and what size components you need, and also what size wires that you'll need. Okay, when we were initially using the inverter, I had these two wires here with lugs on the end that we connected up to the inverter. And you can see these are high voltage wires, and they have these really heavy strands inside of them. That is good for high voltage and low amperage type connections, but it's not quite so good for solar. This is a similar size cable for low voltage applications. You can see the wires inside of it are much finer. They're almost hair-like in size. And the reason behind that is at low voltages, the electrons like to go around the outside of the wire, so the more wires there are, the better the electron flow. With the higher voltages, it's easier to push those electrons along, so you don't have to have near as many conductors inside of a wire. We've got our solar panel wires here that have the proper connectors on the end to fasten to what's already existing on the solar panels. And then we have all these other gauges of wire that are going to be used to connect things up. And this is one of your most expensive parts of a solar system, is all this wire. The cost of the wire adds up pretty quick, and you need a variety for the amount of amperage that it needs to handle. And you also want to keep the runs as short as possible. Okay, all these wires and electrical components are kind of confusing to a lot of people. So the best thing to do is just break this down into individual functions, and you can better understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish when putting all this stuff together. Basically, you have things that you need to power, and the inverter will take the power from the batteries and turn it into a normal household current. And as you can see on the back side of this, we just have a standard outlet for AC on it. And there's just a 110, 120 type of a household outlet, and we hook that into a power strip, and then we can plug additional things into it. So the power strip's basically acting like a fuse box for us, and that also has a overcurrent protection in it. There's a circuit breaker built into it, so that takes care of the 110 side of things. This inverter changes your battery current into something that you can use at the outlet. So if you think of it in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, all you're wanting to do is put battery power into these terminals here and get 110 power out of that end. On the other side of things, as you're using the power out of your batteries, you need some way to put power back into it to recharge them. So this is where this component comes in. This is what takes the current from your solar panels and converts it into a current that can be put back into your batteries. And they're not really complicated. It's got the photovoltaic part right here for your solar panels. You can also connect the load directly to it if you want, and then you have your battery connections over here. So it's not a lot to hooking one up. To connect all the components together, I have these terminal blocks, and you're going to have your heavy current leads coming from your battery going to this, and then the terminals will go into the rest of your system and provide a place to connect everything together. In this particular situation, I'm going to separate out my system with two different circuit breakers. I'm going to have my charging circuit, and these are marine circuit breakers. They're surface mount breakers, and what's nice about them is you can just punch a button on there to disconnect them. So if you need to work on your system, you can break the circuit and then go ahead and feel safe at working on any of the wires. Everything's has insulators on it to add additional safety to the system. You can even utilize these automotive type fuse blocks. You can tap into them with spade connectors on the back to run to whatever other kind of 12 volt or 24 volt wiring that you want to do, and they just use standard automotive fuses. I'm not sure if I'm going to go with that right now because we've kind of changed some things that we were doing and we don't have the need for the low voltage tap on it right now. So most of what we're going to use is going to be coming out of our inverter. If you're going to work on lugs, you need to have some way of connecting the wire into them, and this is a tool for that purpose. There are lots of other ways to do it. There's crimping tools. People have soldered them, but this particular tool here, they're about 20 bucks. It's spring loaded. There's a lever on the back side here that you can pull up. You can set your lug in here, put your wire into it, and then it's intended to be sat down on a surface and then hitting the top of it with a hammer, which works fine. But I've seen where people are having better success putting this into a vise and squeezing it down, which is more than likely the way I'm going to do it because I do have the luxury of a vise here. So that should make that job a little easier. This is going to be the first wire that I need to make for our system, so I'm going to go ahead and crimp this lug, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, I have a vise here and a milling machine, so I'm going to go ahead and try to use that. So we just put our cable in here. I'll tighten up the vise here and squeeze this tool down. Okay, and there's the crimp that it made. You can see that goes in there pretty solid. Okay, so I put a piece of heat shrink tube on our short wire that I just crimped together. These connectors that they have on the Victron units are a little bit on the small side, and one thing you really don't want is where it's pushing the wires back like it's doing right here. So it's kind of touchy to get them to go into the connector, but it can be done. This is as heavy of a gauge wire as I could fit into these connectors, so that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. I like the way this heat shrink tube is working. You can see the adhesive flowing out from underneath of it, so you know that it's shrunk down nice and tight and that you're getting a really good seal around that. Alright, here is the first part of our solar system. This is just the inverter circuit, and we've got the inverter here. We've got a circuit breaker over here, terminal blocks that the battery hooks into. These are the battery leads, and then the connection going into the inverter itself. We've got the battery set up down here. It's a 24 volt array. They're hooked in series. You can see we're pulling the negative wire here. Positive wire is right on the other end, and both batteries are hooked together in series going from positive to negative in the middle. So that combines the batteries and gives us 24 volts. And as I said, the reason we're going with 24 volts is it cuts down a little bit on wire size requirements. So that was just why I went that way. 12 volt stuff is more common, but when you're doing household currents and stuff, it may be an advantage to up your voltage in your system just to make the wiring a little easier. So just check and make sure everything works. Remove this lever up on the circuit breaker to engage it. There is a switch on the inverter here to turn it on, and there's one just for normal running, and then there's an eco setting on here. What's interesting is an inverter draws a little bit of current all the time, and so it's constantly draining off your battery. So if you're not using it, you're still pulling power. And this eco setting, what it does is it looks at items that are intermittent, say like a refrigerator that turns itself on and off. And when you're in that setting, what will happen is your refrigerator will close its contact to demand power. That means it's time for it that it wants to cool itself. And this will take like 15 seconds to go check and see if anything's demanding current, and then it'll go ahead and supply that current to it. So it's not running all the time, it's taking less current itself to run. So basically it just makes an economical way to shut things on and off. So I've attached the load here. We got this wire going over to a fan. Guess we need to turn that on. And we got a green light up here showing everything's ready to go. And here's our load. I just put a fan to it. This is where the volts and amp things that you need to know comes into play. I went and looked on the back plate of this particular fan, and it says it requires 0.8 amps at 120 volts. So if you multiply those two numbers together, you get something to the order of 96 watts, which is well under our 500 mark, so this fan should work. There we're using 120 volt current coming off of our two 24 volt batteries and running a fan. Alright, now that we've tested out our inverter system, it's time to add the charging system into all of this. So I'm going to add the charge controller in here. I've already added the circuit breaker to the board and screwed it on. Okay, I got the Victron strain relief installed on the charge controller here, and these plastic reliefs, it starts off, you put this metal bracket on here, and then these plastic strain reliefs go over the top of it, and the way they're designed, they pull the wire from the connector on the circuit board and pinch them together so that they're tied up against each other as they come out. There's a bunch of things I really don't like about this. Number one, it puts a lot of stress on the connector inside because it's pulling the wires down at the same time it's trying to force them inward, so it's putting a lot of force on those connections. The other thing is it's pushing the wires directly down on a conductive metal bracket, and I'm not sure why they would really want to do that. The only insulation in there is what's on your wires. And then the screw that they put in there, supplied with it, it actually rubs on the insulation of the two wires as it goes in there. I believe there's clearance for everything in there, but it just seems like a really poor design for what it's trying to accomplish, and I probably would have been better off just to leave that out of there. But it did come up with this cover that lets you kind of seal everything off, which is kind of a nice feature, but it doesn't really seem like a good design. Okay, we got the last part of the system installed. The solar charge controller is installed on here, and these are the outputs from the controller. So one's going through this circuit breaker, and the circuit breaker goes over to the main bus that goes to the battery. Then you have the ground for that circuit going over, and it goes over the main bus that connects into the battery. So when there is current applied to these connectors, which will be hooked up to the solar panels, then that will be converted through the charge controller back into voltage that can be used to charge the battery bank back up. Got everything hooked up right now. We're hooked up back onto the batteries. When I turn on the power to the inverter, nothing happens because I have the circuit breaker off. Turn on the circuit breaker, we got a green light over here, and you can see over here that our battery's gone back into charge. So we're getting 120 volts out of the inverter, and that's able to do whatever load that we want on that end of things. Then when we close the circuit breaker on this, might be able to see, but the light for the solar controller starts to flash, showing that it's in the circuit. So this is all complete. And the next time you see this, we'll be hooking power up to it on the mountain. Okay guys, we're up on the mountain again today, and we're finally going to get around to installing our solar system, which is our inverter, our solar converter, and our circuit breakers. Got the terminal blocks on here. That was all for earlier in the video. So we're just going to get mounted up on the wall now, and lack of a better place to put it, it just seems like this is the way we're going to go.
I'm holding it. You're gonna.
Okay. Well.
You're gonna screw it.
Can you even reach that?
I don't know.
Alright, we drilled a hole in the wall for the photovoltaic wires and the leads to the battery to go through. We have these two heavy cables that go up to the terminals on the control board, and then we got a place here where we hook in our solar panels. So I need to go fish the wires inside the building. They'll come up alongside of our cables, and that will connect everything up from the outside. Debbie's pushing in the connectors for the solar panel wiring.
It's because I carried a ticket all these years as an electrician.
Okay, we'll just tie those together. Alright, this is a 24 volt battery system that we're using for power. So we have two 12 volt batteries there connected in series. So I'm connecting the positive and the negative together on one pair of batteries. We'll have to come up with some kind of a outdoor storage for these. They're lead acid batteries, and even though they're sealed, they still are not something you should leave inside of the building with you. Then the wire that connects to our solar system for the positive is hooked up on the red terminal here. And you always want to read the physical markings on the batteries. I leave these plastic caps on here, but it'd be easy to put one of those in the wrong place. So instead, be sure you have the negative and black wire on the negative. So this is just kind of a test of the system here. And we can go see if everything works. Okay, so we got our solar system arrangement connected to the wall, and we put a little mirror backup that we had on another wall. We decided to put it in here, so we have the wires running behind it. And on top of the inverter is where you plug in for 115 volts, and we've got a power strip right here that we're going to use as a kind of a secondary breaker and a place to plug in different appliances. Okay, we're starting to lose our light in here, so I better get going on this, but there's a Bluetooth module that goes with the inverter that we left on our old mount for the inverter. So I'm going to go ahead and screw that in up here. The other end of it has a plug on it that goes into the bottom of the inverter. So we'll get that all hooked up, and then we'll be back to try our lights and see if they work. Okay, we got the panel mounted up. Bluetooth module for the inverter is connected down here. And we're going to go ahead and try this thing out and see if it works. Everything's hooked up except for the solar panels right now, but we can run the inverter off of our batteries. So we close up these breakers here. Guess we really only need to close the one for the inverter right now. And I got a switch underneath here to turn the inverter on, and we got some lights coming on. The Bluetooth module is showing that it has activity. We got power going down to our breaker box arrangement here. And we got this $15 LED shop work light. And now we have light.
Great.
And it's amazing for a $15 light that it actually lights things up in here really well. So we got 3 of them, and I think that might be overkill for this little room.
Definitely.
But that is our solar system until we get the panels hooked up, and then we'll see how that works. Okay, we've got a pair of 265 watt solar panels that we bought used. So they were under, I think they were like $90 a piece, which makes them pretty economical. Because they are used, they are going to be a little less efficient than what they would have been if they were new, but it's still going to put out more wattage than little 100 watt panels that you spend over $100 for. So it's still going to work out as a pretty good deal for us. Got a voltmeter plugged into 2 of the connections right now, and we're showing 41 volts on this panel. And actually my shadow's on it a little bit, so that changes it. This is open current voltage. They're rated for like 44 volts when they're new. And this other panel showing 42 volts right now. And of course that has all to do with the angle and everything else. They're kind of at a steep angle right now to the sun. So we'll go ahead and hook these up in series and connect them to the control panel and see if that's going to work. So we're going to hook the positive of one solar panel into the negative of the other solar panel. And then that leaves us a positive to go into our solar controller. And that just leaves the connector from the solar controller to the other panel. So that should all be hooked up. Now we'll go inside and see if this thing's charging. Okay, so we got the solar panels coming in here, and they're connected to the PV terminals on the solar controller. So really all that's left to do is to connect this breaker right here. And that is connected. And we'll have to go take a look at our batteries outside. We'll see if they're getting a charge, but there's also a Bluetooth app for that controller. It has the Bluetooth built into it, where the inverter has this unit up here that had to be added on as an accessory to read it, but we can get that set up and see what the phone application is saying. I turned on the Victron app on my phone that I already had for the inverter, which is this one up here, and the smart solar's already showed up on here. So we can open that up. And it shows that it's connecting, and we're just going to use the default pin on it right now. And right now it's going to go do an update since it's a new item. We'll come back when the update's over and see if everything is functioning. Right now you can see we're getting 25.8 volts going into the batteries. They were pretty well charged, so the controller may already be cutting back on them. But everything's looking good out here. Okay, so we got the app set up and running, changed the pin code on it so nobody can come in and change our settings with their cell phone. But right now it's showing us 252, 253 watts going into the batteries. I went out and checked the batteries and they were showing over 27 volts going into them right now. So our solar system is up and functioning. We have a green indicator light on our controller that shows everything's going good up there. We don't have any sparks or smoke coming off anything. I think I call this one a success so far. We'll get the wiring neatened up a little bit, get some kind of covers in place for the voltage terminals so nobody can accidentally short those with anything, and we should have a self-sufficient power station and lighting for the mini yurt.